Gardner Planning Commission meeting for September 27th, 2021. If you haven't signed our attendance sheet at the back table, if you could do that for me, please, I'd appreciate it. At this time, we'll call the meeting to order. Please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge
allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right. Do roll call starting in my far right.
Commissioner Hand.
Commissioner Hanson present. Bowden here.
Commissioner McNear here.
Commissioner Juneman here.
Commissioner Cooper here.
All right, we have a quorum of 6. Consent agenda, all matters listed within the consent agenda have been distributed to each member of the Planning Commission for study. These items are considered to be routine and will be enacted upon by one motion with no separate discussion. If separate discussion is desired on an item from either the Planning Commission or from the floor, that item may be removed from the consent agenda and placed on the regular agenda. We have one item on consent, standing approval of the minutes is written for the meeting on August 23rd, 2021. Does anybody want that removed or have any changes? All right, I'd accept a motion to accept the consent agenda.
So moved.
Have a second?
Second.
I have a motion by Commissioner McNear and a second by Commissioner Juneman to set the consent agenda. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any against? Any abstentions? Motion passes 6-0. All right, item number 1 on our regular agenda is tall grass second plat. We have a 1A and a 1B. Are we doing presentation on both?
Yes.
All right. Would the developer or applicant like to speak on this?
Mr. Chairman, don't really have anything to add to what the report will be, but if you have any questions for me, I'm glad to answer them.
Okay.
Thank you.
Sid.
Good evening, Commissioners. This presentation is for our items 1A and 1B. It's for a final plat and for also the final development plan. Okay, this is the second phase of the tallgrass development. The original development was approved back in 2019, and this is basically for the final plat is a 3-lot development. The 2 small lots up on the northwestern part of the development are for 2 duplexes. As you see, this is just the plat itself, showing the 3 lots, lots 4, 5, and 3. Staff findings for the final plat that's consistent with the preliminary plat and the land development code. The request for final platting is consistent with all the goals and policies of the city, and no adjustments or deviations were required for this plat. And staff recommends approval of the final plat for tallgrass second plat with the conditions outlined in the recommended motion.
All right. Is there any commissioners that have any comments or discussion items?
This is for any comments for being passed the plat. It's just the plat.
We'll do the plat right now, right before. All right. I'll accept a motion then on item 1A.
After review of application FP-2106, a final plat for tallgrass second plat, tax ID CP 945000,
000T0C. In staff report dated September 27th, 2021, the Planning Commission approves the application as proposed, provided the following conditions are met. 1, prior to issuance of a building permit, the application shall obtain approval from the Johnson County Board of Commissioners. Item 2, prior to the mayor signing an approved recordable plat, the applicable excise tax shall be paid to the city. Item 3, the construction plans for any utilities, infrastructure, or public facilities shall meet all technical specifications and public improvement plans, which shall be submitted and approved prior to the release of the plat for recording. And forwards recommendation for approval to the governing body.
Second?
Second.
I have a motion by Commissioner McNear and a second by Commissioner Ham. Is there any further discussion on the motion? All right, all those in favor state aye.
Aye.
Any against? Any abstentions? Motion passes 6-0. You have presentation for 1B?
Well, I do. Item 1B, FDP 2107, the final development plan for Tallgrass second plat. As you can see on the screen, this development plan has 7 buildings with 136 units, total units, and 2 duplex homes with, again, 4 units. This is all located on and also has 5.2 acres of open space, including a sports court, internal trail system, and clubhouse with a pool. Here's an example of the elevations. These basically have not changed any from the first phase. The staff findings on this for this development plan that they are consistent with the preliminary development plan. The site is capable of accommodating the buildings, uses, and other site design elements. The architecture and materials provided for quality buildings, and the overall design is compatible to the context considering the location near residential and commercial properties. Staff recommends approval of the final development plan for Tallgrass second plat, subject to the conditions outlined in the recommended motion.
Thank you. Officer, Commissioner Judman, you had a question?
Yeah, there was a lot of kind of future stuff shown on the east side of the plans. I guess being kind of new in the commission, I didn't know if there's more apartments can be planned to the east of this development, or what's planned in that?
Yes, there is. And if you want to see a copy of the preliminary development plan that was approved back in 2019, we can always provide you with a copy of that. But again, this second phase basically follows that preliminary development plan to a T. It's nothing has changed.
Okay, because I was just curious there's a big long parking strip shown on that future part that's outside of this plat, and it wasn't clear to me what that parking was for. It didn't show any buildings close to it. So that was my main question, I guess. If maybe developer or something or engineer.
You probably didn't cut that
Well, we're
off
waiting
the
for them to
drawing.
get up here. So just for the new commissioners, so that they're aware, this is not unusual for development to occur this way. Many times we'll approve a preliminary development plan, which is the overall concept, which is a larger concept, and then the developer will come in phases and final plan the various phases. So just to clarify, so that you're aware, you'll see some of these things, and I know you weren't here for that preliminary plan discussion, but that way everybody here who's new has an understanding of that process.
Do you want me to? Todd Allenbrand, 426 South Kansas Avenue, Olathe, Kansas, Painted Brockway. The parking that's showed on the east side, let's call it the east side, is the bank of parking for 3 more buildings that will be on the other side of that parking lot, including we showed their future garages adjacent to it. We typically try to show things within 25 feet or so of the development, just so everybody has an idea that it's what's coming in the future and that it matches what was approved.
Okay, yeah, because I saw like some future buildings shown on another part of the plan, and it looked like there was a strip of grass there between parking and the road. So
Yeah.
that's where the color. Like, I just want to make sure it wasn't like, hey, we need this many parking spaces for the apartment complex, but we're just going to do it another phase.
Well, eventually there'll be another phase. That's actually part of phase 3, which, depending on how quick Mr. Bickley wants to move, that'll be in the future phase. Thank you.
Phase 3 is one of the big discussion items we had that had to do with buffering and stuff like that.
I had, sorry, one more question. I guess this is kind of a question for David, but when this talks about like this was originally being zoned for low density residential, it talks about like the densities being like 13.84 units per acre. It seemed like looking at other cities like Overland Park, Olathe, Annex, they kind of define their low density residential as 5 units per acre or 8 units per acre. Even like Olathe, I think, has medium density residential is less than 8 units per acre. So I just want to make sure we're kind of being consistent with saying what's low density based on how they plan for infrastructure like roads and utilities for stormwater and sanitary sewers. So that's more of kind of a general comment. I know we're kind of past that right now, but I don't know.
Doesn't matter.
I'm gonna let Bob go first.
Oh, okay. Well, when the preliminary development plan came in, this was actually mentioned as part of our staff report, that this was designated on the comp plan for low-density development. However, the comp plan is just kind of a guide, and it's not, doesn't really set any rules in stone. So that's why we had the public hearing, allowed the public to get up and speak, allowed the developer, and then we also gave our opinion too. And
Yeah, I think to add to that, so in certain communities like Overland Park and other places, many times they'll go through a comprehensive plan amendment process along with the rezoning request or the development request. Here we do not do that, but we do go through our annual review and should be updating that portion of the comprehensive plan to reflect what's been approved. So it's a little bit different in process here, but you're right. The low density residential many times refers to 5 units or less. It's usually suburban density, single family homes, if you will. So that may have been what the comprehensive plan was showing, but through the public hearing process on the preliminary development plan and rezoning, it allows for the higher density through that approval. And again, as Bob mentioned, the key is that we have that advertised public hearing, we go through the process, and the Planning Commission certainly has that ability to either recommend approval or denial. If they believe the comprehensive plan, that's one of your decision cards that you can use to say yes or no to a project. You can look at that comprehensive plan and say, hey, this is inconsistent with the comprehensive plan, so therefore I'm recommending against it. Or you can still recommend for it even though it is against the plan, because you're seeing a marketplace that's changed since that plan was done. So there's flexibility, as Bob mentioned. The comp plan in Kansas is a guide at the end of the day. It's an adopted guide, if you will. It is not law like our zoning code. So that's what gives you all the flexibility to recommend differently as we're seeing changes, because usually a comprehensive plan update, you're not going to see it more than a major one every 5 years, 10 years maybe, with the census and things like that as you get new demographics. But that annual review should be a checkpoint where we go, okay, how do we want to adjust that future land use map to reflect what we've approved over the past year? Does that make sense?
It's probably a good idea to find the date of that hearing so that the new commissioners that weren't here for that approval process could watch the meeting so that you're up to date on why that decision was made and see all the comments and so forth.
We could send you a link.
Kind of
to that
rehashing
back.
the whole
Yeah.
meeting where it's already.
and those dates are in the history portion of the staff report, so you can see those exact dates. But we can, by all means, we can send you that information too.
No further questions.
Does anyone else have any comments that they'd like to make or questions? All right, I don't have anything either, so at this time I'd accept the motion on this.
I'd make that motion. After review of application FDP 2107, the final development plan for Tallgrass, second plat, tax ID CP 945000000T0C, and staff report dated September 27, 2021. The Planning Commission approves the application as proposed, provided the following condition is met. 1. Prior to the issuance of a building permit, the application shall obtain approval from the Johnson County Board of Board of Commissioners. 2, approval of the final plat for Tallgrass, second plat, and forwards the recommendation for approval to the governing body.
Do I have a second?
Second.
I have a motion by Commissioner Hanson and a second by Commissioner McNears. Any further discussion on the motion? All right, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Any against? Any abstentions? Motion passes 6-0. Thank you. All right, regular agenda item number 2 is a public hearing. It's Gardner Land Development Code Amendment, off-site signage. Do we have an intro by the city?
As they get the slide presentation up there, we'll go through this. Staff has a presentation for you tonight, and then there is a public hearing attached with this. So after the presentation, you'll be able to open the public hearing. With that, just very quickly, this is an amendment to the LDC, the Land Development Code. As you may or may not know, amendments may be initiated by the governing body, the Planning Commission, or by staff. In this particular case, this has been initiated by the public to the governing body, and the governing body chose to have us look at this section of code in particular. So this has been initiated by the governing body. The process for doing this is prescribed in section 17.3.110. And as you can see, you'll be holding a public hearing, you'll make a recommendation, and then the governing body will consider adoption of an ordinance. As I mentioned in June, this was initiated by the governing body upon hearing from a sign provider and property owner along the I-35 corridor. It was introduced to the Planning Commission last month at the August meeting. City attorney has reviewed the content that's proposed in front of you tonight, and there have been revisions made and incorporated into the draft based on that commentary from the city attorney. The chapters that are impacted are 17.05 zoning districts and use standards and 17.10 the sign standards. And the reason both of these chapters are impacted is, and I'll get into this a little bit more, is we're looking at signs as a use of land. And that's an important differentiation because of the way our code is written. We needed to make some differentiations in the categories and how we look at signs overall. So when I go through this, hopefully you can stay with me, and if you have questions, just let me know. Again, as we're considering this, the I-35 corridor and the existing land use pattern, as you can see here, the I-35 corridor runs diagonally across the screen from the lower left-hand corner to the upper right-hand corner. The 3 red dots represent 3 billboards that are out there currently along that corridor, one at the I-35 and 175th interchange in that northeast quadrant, and then 2 on the what would be the southeast side of I-35, just south of the Walmart site. Okay. What you can see by the existing land use map, and the reason I show this is most of the land use in this area is still agricultural or vacant. It has not been developed at this point. The yellows and the tan colors represent residential development. The reds represent commercial development, and the purples represent industrial development. So that's the existing context along the corridor. From a zoning standpoint, you see a similar kind of pattern. Again, the 3 dots representing the 3 billboards that are there. The reds being commercial zoning districts, the purples being industrial zoning districts, the yellows and tan colors being residential zoning districts, and then the green being agricultural districts. What's important to note here, and you'll notice all 3 of these signs are either on a commercially zoned property or an industrially zoned property. Tonight, when we start talking about the regulatory side, it's going to be important to note what the state statutes say about land use and what types of zoning these types of signs need to have. From a future land use standpoint, this gets to the question about the comprehensive plan, obviously, as a guide. So what we did here is we took the future land use map with the 2 sub-area plans that have been done and amended to the comprehensive plan, one being the I-35 and 175th area that's outlined in a lime green or bright green outline. The red area is the Gardner Road interchange sub-area plan there. You'll notice the purples and reds, again, consistently industrial, commercial, anticipated future land use growth, with the yellows, oranges, tans being anticipated future residential growth, the green being agricultural or rural in development pattern. Now, this is the interesting part of what Commissioner Juneman was talking about. If you look up at 175th Street, in that southeast quadrant where you see a lot of purple and red up there at the top, you'll know that the Grata development has been approved, and much of that is residential development. So again, this points to where the comprehensive plan may have been a guide, but due to market changes, due to development proposals that came up to us, that development pattern that was approved is a different development pattern, which then also will get reflected as we update the comprehensive plan to that current zoning or what's been approved for a development pattern, but may also influence some of these land use patterns that we're talking about as future land use in the near future. Very quickly on the 3 existing signs, I just did this briefly to give you an idea of what's advertised out there currently on the 3 different signs, kind of a separation distance. You can get an idea here. The distances between the 2 southern signs are about 1,600 feet. It's a measurement off of an aerial that's in the computer, so it's kind of a digital measurement. It's not an exact measurement. And then from the sign, the middle sign to the most northern sign is about 4,000 feet. And I did that mainly just to give you some scale as we're talking about numbers. You get a feel of the separation. Pretty much these are standard billboards. What's interesting here is the billboard to the north. It's on the I-35 and 175th interchange, was established somewhere between 1994 and 96, likely when it was out in the county. It is now in the city and would be considered a non-conforming sign. It's legally established, but it's a non-conforming sign, so it does not retain its full development rights. So it's just like a non-conforming structure or use at that point because it was approved under the county regulations. The other 2 signs, best I could tell, they were replacing previous signs that were a little bit further south than these current locations, and they were older signs, but around 2014 to 2016, not 20,166, that'd be way out there in the future. Just noticed that typo. But those were replacing a couple of older signs that seemed to be in the area around that point in time. Those are V-shaped signs, if you will, or V-type signs, whereas the one up on 175th Street is basically a double structure. It's a parallel structure, if you will. Single structure, 2 signs independently. The regulatory context, I thought it was important to show you this because we make note that about 5 miles of the I-35 corridor are within the Gardner, are along Gardner, if you will, or interface with Gardner. So just from north of 199th Street to up to Clare Road on the north end is where we have city limits lines that abut or are adjacent to I-35. The red areas, or the red lines, if you will, are out in the county. They are not in the city. So anything where you see a red line would be regulated and controlled by the county regulations. The purple line down at the bottom in the south, what would be the lower left area there is the city of Edgerton. They would have regulations potentially for signs in that area, and in the blue area is the interface where we would have regulatory jurisdiction. So when you think about this, there's a large section of this that still falls under the county jurisdiction. Very quickly, Kansas has rules, the state, and so does the county. In regard to the state, we can be more restrictive, but not less restrictive than the state regulations. So just make sure we understand that as a base. Any of these numbers, when we start talking about, it's important to recognize that state requirement. We can be more restrictive, but we can't loosen it up any looser than what they have. On the county side, we don't have to be either way. We can be less, we can be more restrictive, we can be the same. So we have that option. But our laws would only apply to the lands that are within our jurisdiction. As far as the city of Gardner, the interesting aspect that I wanted to make sure that I explained to you all and those listening, we operate under a unified development code, which means our zoning districts, our use standards, our building standards, and our sign standards are all part of that UDO. They're all under that same kind of regulatory element. So that means like our sign standards are open to variance requests, because they're part of the UDO. Some places sign standards will be a separate ordinance or a separate regulation and they won't allow for variances. But in our structure, there are things that we can leverage and take advantage of because it's a unified development code. Some cases that's variances. Variances have very strict criteria and requirements. To meet those, you have to meet all 5 of those requirements before a variance should be recommended for approval or approved. But we do have one other element here, which are the administrative adjustments. And for those of you who were with us back last January, February, in that time frame, we made a code adjustment in section 17.03.080, and I think it's important for everybody to understand. When a sign would come in under this proposal, they would be looked at for these types of administrative adjustments. So the numbers that we have in the draft regulations at this point in time, if a sign were to come in for a sign permit with their site plan, under the administrative site plan process, they could have up to a 10% deviation of those numbers, which is significant in some of those numbers, just so you're aware. When we're talking hundreds of feet, for instance, we have a 500-foot requirement on some things. At 10%, that means we could vary that by 50 feet, okay? So there's some flexibility there. If they came in and that wasn't enough, if 10% wasn't meeting what they were hoping for, they could come in under the site plan and design review, which then comes to Planning Commission. It's out of staff's hands at that point. It comes to you all in that process. And under that, you could have up to a 20% deviation or administrative adjustment if the Planning Commission so sees fit to do that. Okay, and that's on things like setbacks, separation distances, heights, that kind of physical requirement, okay? Then the third option that's there, if they want to try to get beyond that 20%, is to come through the development plan review process, which is a more intense review process. It involves you as a planning commission taking a look at a development plan for the overall site and how the sign would fit into it. And then that would go to the to the city council governing body for final decision making. But they could request deviations beyond that 20%. Now they have to meet certain criteria, but this is what's a little bit unusual about our code. We do have these administrative adjustment capabilities without having to necessarily go through the formal variance process. What I wanted to point out on that last bullet point is just simply with plan districts in the development plan, there are 8 review criteria that we look at. Primarily, we're looking at the context of the site and what's going on and how the sign may fit into that. In regard to the proposed amendments, it's important for us to differentiate a few things, and I want to kind of clarify a little bit. We have to be careful about United States Supreme Court rulings that have happened in recent years, as well as some of the regulations the state has and the county has. So there's some things that we are going to be sensitive to. For instance, we as a city cannot regulate the content message of the sign, okay? That's freedom of speech, that First Amendment right, things like that. A lot of court cases get engaged in that, and it's a slippery slope, let's put it that way. That's when we turn to our attorneys many times and go, guess what? We've got a situation here. Is this allowable or not allowable? And we look to them to provide us the guidance on court cases, because there are court cases happening as we speak that may evolve that over time. But right now, we do not have the ability to regulate the content or the messaging that would appear on the display area or on the signboard itself. So for that reason, we've taken an option here to look at signs from the standpoint of as land uses. So we're differentiating in chapter 17.05, we're establishing 2 categories. Ancillary signs, which are signs that are associated or supporting other uses on the property. 95% of our, well, right now 100% of our signs are ancillary signs, because we do not allow signs to advertise off their sites. So basically right now, everything would be considered an ancillary sign because it's associated with a business or an accessory use on the property on which the sign is located. So that's where we go with the word ancillary. This is supporting or it's associated with those uses. What we're making a differentiation of then is the principal use category for signs. And these would be signs not associated with other uses on the parcel, okay? Because understand, when we get to item K later on where we're crossing out the message content, you'll notice it talks about advertising or business language or business message, which we can't regulate by, but there are also a lot of signs that have no business message whatsoever. Okay, they're not advertising a McDonald's or a Walmart or a Hampton Inn or a Quick Trip. So they have no business message per se. So there was kind of a strange category there. So this is the idea that you can have a sign on your property, but it's going to be the principal use of that property at that point in time, and that's how we're looking at it. So table 5.2, the use table, we're supplementing that to put ancillary signs and principal use signs into the table itself. And you'll see the A because there are signs that are associated with the residential districts, in some cases, home occupation signs and different things like that. They're allowed at a very small scale. So that's why that letter A is in all of those categories at this point in time for the accessory or ancillary sign piece. As far as the principal use, right now staff is recommending that the C3 category, M1 category, and M2 category be where principal use signs would be allowed. So the properties would have to be zoned either C3, M1, or M2 as their base zoning to allow for a principal use on there. Now that corresponds with the state requirement that it has to be on commercially zoned or industrially zoned property. We have stopped at the C3 category because in general staff felt at this point the C2 category and lesser commercial districts are more oriented towards neighborhood type uses and things like that, where this principal use kind of structure may not fit into that zoning category. So for chapter 17.10 then, the sign standards, principal use signs, I've already talked about. They're allowed in this, C2, C3. Actually, so we'll come back to 5.2, the table. C2, C3, M1, and M2 districts is where we want to be. I failed to correct that table, 5-2. It would be allowed on property abutting or adjacent to I-35. So this would only be allowed on commercial or industrial properties with the zoning categories you see here on properties that are abutting or adjacent to I-35. It would not be allowed along interchange ramps or acceleration and deceleration lanes or for 500 feet beyond such lanes, okay? And vehicular access must be provided from the nearest roadway other than I-35. This is to accommodate emergency access vehicles in case we have an incident out there. We've got to have some type of route that those vehicles can get there on. So that'll be something that through the site permitting process, fire department will be involved in and things like that to look at, is this an acceptable route? Is it an acceptable roadway? Will it work? Okay. And then right now we're recommending a maximum number of 1 sign per parcel. Continuing on, the separation between principal use signs, we would require 600 feet for non-electric or digital or LED signs. The state requires 500 feet of separation, and then 1,000 feet for electric, digital, and LED signs. So there's a differentiation between those electronic message board type signs versus the standard sign that we'd have there. Total display area, the maximum facing any one direction would be 750 square feet. The maximum dimensions 15 by 50. Maximum height that we're recommending at this point is 30 feet for the overall height of the sign. So 15 of that feet could be in the display area, 15 feet could be between the ground level and the sign bottom. In regard to setbacks, we are recommending a 50-foot setback from I-35, the right-of-way line, a 500-foot setback from property that is zoned residential for non-electric digital signs, and 1,000 feet from property zoned residential from electric and digital signs. Differentiation here is, again, we have a number of areas where we have residential already in the area. Placing signs up there will have an impact on those properties potentially because of the proximity and because of the lighting and things like that. So we've tried to get to a separation distance that would work, and we differentiated between those digital LED signs and the standard signs. Just to give you a rough idea, this was in your packet as a graphic. The properties that are got the blue outline in them are residentially zoned properties. The red outline is the buffer feature that identifies 500 feet on this particular sign or particular slide so that you can see where that buffer might fall 500 feet away from residentially zoned property as you're looking at the corridor. And then the next one, maybe, is the 1,000-foot buffer. So the idea that we can put these buffers on there and see where they are, if we have questions as we're moving along, we can certainly take a look at that. The key about understanding this is that our code amendments have to take into consideration the context that exists today, what we have, but then we're also growing in this area. So we will be annexing on that east side of I-35 eventually. We don't know when, but as development occurs, we have to be considering how these codes work today and in the future when we annex in these areas. So that makes it a little bit difficult for us here. Just to give you a rough idea then of the other standards that are involved, I'm not going to read everything here on the lighting and everything. This is pretty standard language, corresponds with the state regulations as well as our local regulations. The types of signs you would be seeing out here are monument or pole signs as defined by our code. The lighting, you can see no flashing, intermittent, or moving lighting. You can see that we want the direct and indirect lighting sources to be shielded in a way that, it's preventing glare and having a problem for drivers. This third bullet point, I did hand out to you in your packet a little 3-pager that talks about this measurement of light. And the reason I did that is because our code currently for message boards identifies this NITS, N-I-T-S, measurement, which has to do with LED lighting, and it has to do with a square meter and how much light's emitted through that process, so on and so forth. These two standards, the 500 and the 5,000, are already in our code. That's why I'm using them. They apply to the message boards, things like, I think Walgreens has a message board above it. I'm pretty sure it does, isn't it, Bob? I think it's the Walgreens. Anyway, for these message boards that you see, so this would be consistent with those lighting requirements for daytime and nighttime lighting. As far as construction maintenance, there's 3 or 4 bullet points here on construction maintenance to make sure that the structure, once it's established, is maintained and kept in good structural condition. The last bullet point speaks to the fact that the permit for that sign would have to be renewed every 5 years. That would involve a structural engineer or certified inspection report coming from an engineer that the applicant would bring in to tell us that that is still a structurally sound structure, which is pretty important. There were a number of structures in the old days that were not maintained properly necessarily. So the idea here is this gives us a checkpoint to simply say, okay, are we still in good shape? Is this sign effective and working the way it should be? Or do we have an unsafe condition that needs to be mitigated? Finally, so that everybody knows, it'd still be subject to all applicable state and federal regulations, including the beautification regulations of the state of Kansas. So anything we have in there, if we are silent on it and have not addressed it, and the state has, those state regulations still apply to those things. So there's licensing and permitting, for instance, at the state level for these types of signs. So they would have to go through that. And then the final recommendation in this chapter is that we remove 17.10.050 letter K, and this is where we get into the messaging that currently states any sign with a business message shall be located on the site of the business activity. The mere fact that we're citing content makes this section of code null and void. We cannot do this the way it is written because of the U.S. Supreme Court ruling. So we are suggesting this be removed out of our current code. Staff recommendation tonight is to conduct the public hearing. Then after you've heard from the public, to have a discussion on the proposed amendments, make a recommendation to the governing body regarding those amendments, and then finally your motion options are covered, and we will go through that a little bit at the end. But the other option that you do have that is not listed here is you may wish to table this to consider some items or to add or change or look at things that you want the staff to look at. So that's an option that is also on the table here for you. So with that, I am going to stop my presentation, and if there are questions, I can answer them now, or we can wait till after the public hearing and do that.
Is there any currently?
I have a question. You were talking about the property that we would possibly annex on the east side.
Mm-hmm.
So if we were to approve this and a sign goes up over there, what happens if we annex that property for residential use?
Very, very good question. So if a sign goes up and it's under the county regulations, which it would be, it's unannexed property, and we annex that property with that sign on it, it would be the same as the sign that's up on 175th Street currently. It would be considered illegal because it was established through the legal process that the county required, a legal non-conforming use because it would not meet our standards potentially. Okay, so at that point, that does throw some other criteria on the sign as to whether it can be replaced or how much of it can be added to or adjusted in value over time. So it has some limitations on that sign, but it would not be required to be removed or anything like that. It just has that non-conforming, legal non-conforming status.
In that case, because it was already there, the developer that bought that land they would already know that it exists.
Yeah, usually that's the case. And usually with that, what's important about that comment is generally somebody buying into an existing situation, they're going to see it, they know it, it's there. And that's the difference between when you're first establishing it, when there are other uses already around. So that's why we get a little sensitive about the separation to existing zoned land for residential purposes, because you have people who have bought in and are looking out their back windows or, you know, getting out on their front yard or walking through the neighborhood, and they have this expectation of what they're going to see or not see along there. So that's why the separation distances become important for those signs that have not been established at this point in time. But again, out there in the county, once they establish those, somebody comes in and develops after the fact, yes, the developer is well aware of it or should be well aware of it, and most of the potential buyers are going to see it or should.
Anything else? Anybody else got anything right now?
Okay.
Thank you.
All right.
We don't have another presentation on this item, so at this time I will open the public hearing. Anyone from the public like to speak, you can come to the podium, state your name and address, please. Go ahead, sir.
And Mr. Chairman, as he comes up to the podium, I just want to cite two things that are at your dais that are important. We did receive 2 letters this afternoon, one from Quick Trip and one from BCI Mechanical. I'm not going to read those per se, but they're both in support of having some greater flexibility to the sign ordinance to allow billboards. And this will be part of the record that will get transferred to the governing body if this moves forward. So I just wanted to cite that for the record.
My name's Lynn Baker. I'm managing member of L&J Development, and I live on a farm just south of Spring Hill. And I want to thank you guys for your time, guys and gals, excuse me, for your time, and Dave, all your work putting this thing together, and Bob, I think you probably was involved in it as well. But we're pleased to hear Dave's recommendation, but there's a couple of things in there that kind of gives us a little bit of heartburn. We bought this ground with half a mile of frontage on I-35, 2,600 feet, and it's in the comprehensive plan as C2, I believe. And we think it's a problem to designate one sign per parcel, because you already have the distance between signs that you allow. So one sign per parcel, a guy that's got 600 feet can put a sign on it, and I've got a half a mile, and I can still only put one sign on it. I think the distance can govern what you can put on there anyway. So rather than limit it to one sign per parcel, doesn't do well, certainly for us anyways. And a couple of other things. You know, we bought this ground before the intermodal, and the city of Edgerton and the city of Gardner was tossing up who was gonna get the property. Well, I don't particularly like Edgerton. Don't put that in the paper.
It's on YouTube, right?
So anyway, Steve Schutte approached us and the other powers to be here, and we agreed to annex into Gardner, and certainly happy that we did that because we didn't want to be on the other side. But we were going to put a high-end motorhome park in there, and that's still a possibility. We've got a couple of people looking at it, which would require C2 zoning, I think, David, wouldn't it, for a motorhome park? I believe it would.
Yes, I think that's
And anyway, the other 2 items that kind of give us a little bit of heartburn is the 30-foot height. I mean, that's awfully low compared to most billboard signs. And, you know, that and the 50-foot setback. 50 feet's a long ways back in your property. And if you look at the property that we have, it's going to take out a bunch of trees if you have to go back 50 feet. And the other trees around it's going to probably hide the sign some. So that's the other issue. And the thing that I think's most important to the city of Gardner is people coming from the south, north, are gonna see the signs for businesses in Gardner before they get on by and get up to Kansas City. Or if it's on past Gardner, they're already past all the exits, and they're going on up to Kansas City. They're not gonna turn around and come back and visit Olathe Ford RV and the hotel, and, you know. So coming from the south, I think is very important. And also, we would like to donate some land to the city for a city monument sign. Welcome to the city of Gardner. You know, right there at the end of our property. We're the very southwest corner of the city of Gardner. And I think across the road is Edgerton, so, and both sides, actually. So anyways, hopefully you consider, I'm kind of glad to hear Dave say there's some flexibility in what you can approve, but those three things, if you write it, I don't know if you have any flexibility there if it's written that way. Do you think, Dave?
I'll wait until we're done with the public hearing.
Oh, okay. Anyways, that's all. Thank you for your time.
All right, thank you, sir. Do we have anyone else for public comment?
Good evening. My name is Jason Camus. I'm the president of the Gardner Chamber of Commerce. 109, across the street, there's my address, 109 East Main. I'm here, you know, I think this is great that you guys are visiting this, and I have spoken with the developer about this. Wingert Billboards has been a member of our chamber, and I for several years, and I did talk to Fred a little bit about this, but I also, I want to say I appreciate, Dave, the commentary, because that's actually something I wasn't familiar with, the administrative, some of the changes and some of that. First, to start from the billboard side, though, you know, just some general, I won't bore you with too much data, but over 70% of people, you know, comment in studies that they recognize billboards and they see billboards and they can recall what they've actually seen. I think the number's like 55% in a recent study showed that people remember funny stuff on billboards, and I'm sure we can think of that. And I'm betting that every one of you, including I, know when we see a bad billboard. And that's something we can recall in conversation. And so I wanted to kind of go to just a couple of things on the, you know, I think Lynn makes some good points. You know, if we have a 600 foot or 1,000 foot, how many are on one parcel? I mean, that would limit any landowner or any developer as to what that would be. So I think it should be sufficient in my mind to have a distance of whatever that is. And I would trust the staff would have the right idea of what that looks like. The second, on the 30-foot billboard, think about the ceilings here are probably 12 feet. So that billboard's right above our head. And if you think about coming northbound, particularly on I-35, and I'm not sure if I should say this because I don't know who owns all of those billboards, but I think we all know which billboards we hardly can tell. We can hardly see what they say because, one, they're too low. Two, I think there's even one on the wrong side of the road. It doesn't have a backside, and it's angled the wrong direction, which it happens to be advertised from one of our business owners. And so what I would say is, you know, this standard, as I did some research, the standard's of 50 foot for a billboard. And you'll find some that can do 70 or 80, and then you'll find some that are 30. But I think with the speed coming up the highway and what we want to be able to see, and if we're going to limit them, 50 foot would seem to make sense. As for the setback, I'm not sure, you know, in terms of the administrative, my concern there would be what would potentially, how that would impact a potential development if it was required 50. Now, if there's deviation there, if it makes sense, to Lynn's point, to save trees because there's a future development, I would hate to see a future development be impacted because we have to go so far back, and maybe that's 30 feet someplace, 15 feet one place, 50 foot another. Those would be the three things that I would encourage you to look at. And I will say I did speak to some business owners. A couple of them, I think there were letters submitted, but Olathe Ford RV, the Grotto development, you know, just reached out to a few that I knew and said, hey, what do you think about billboards? You know, of course, they were like, I don't have any property. I can't put any. And, you know, I said, well, what if we had another place for them? They said, definitely, that's something that businesses will ask for. Grotto made the comment that, you know, even their first couple businesses that they're looking at, they're the exact, they couldn't name those businesses, but they're the exact type that would typically be seen on billboards. And we've heard that from others in town here. So the billboard thing is a good thing. I think it's a good opportunity for our community. And I think in that limitation that we have, I think it can be done right. So I encourage you to give it some thought, and I'll answer any questions if you have any.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Do we have any other? Yes, sir.
Hi, good evening. My name is Fred Wingert. I live at 20920 Walmer Road in Stillwell, Kansas. I was involved. We approached Dave and the council members about potentially doing this. We own and operate, my wife and I own and operate a small billboard company. We have the 2 signs that we built on Larry Stricker's property 2014, 2015, and we've advertised with various businesses in the Gardner area. And we were the ones that kind of proposed this idea at first. We first of all, I appreciate your service to the city. There are some letters that, in addition to the ones we had some others, individuals from the Gardner the first one is from Ron Stricker, who owns and operates the local auction business. He's actually used billboards in his business. Quick Trip reached out to us about 6 months ago looking for billboard signage coming northbound and southbound. We've had multiple conversations with them about the lack of billboards. Olathe RV, we've had conversations with them. They've actually advertised. BCI Mechanical is a local mechanical company. Perkins has actually been a customer of ours, is a current customer, but is on a bill, not with us, but another billboard way south. They would like to have one closer for their Perkins. And the last one's from a local developer. We appreciate all the time that staff put into this. They put a lot of time into this, Dave and Bob and the different meetings, and we really appreciate that. The regulations that have been proposed are actually really good. I think they're reasonable in terms of allowing some billboards. Is it possible to put up the map that shows the proposed text amendments? So if you look at the map, the first one is the 500 feet buffer from residential. And then there's not a slide, but if you superimpose at both exits, the 500 feet buffer, so there's a 500 feet from both. So you can take this map and superimpose from the Gardner Road exit.
Excuse me for a second. Is the map on his screen now?
Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
It is.
Okay. This is just because there's people
Awesome.
that actually may be watching this live. So.
I'm on TV? Okay. So if you actually, from both exits, because you don't have one superimposed with the exits too, right? Okay. So you can superimpose over this from both exits going back 500 feet from where it actually widens. So if you take out that area, both at the Gardner Road exit and then 175th, where the road actually starts to widen for the exit, you go 500 feet, and those are all restricted areas for billboards. So if we look at, and I know the comment was made in the last meeting, there are communities where there's lots and lots and lots of signs, and that's a bit of an eyesore. The probability of that happening with the 600 feet separation required, the 500 feet that you have to be back, you have to be commercial or industrial. There's a very limited number of properties that any one could go on. So, the concern about proliferation is something that, we hear about all the time on a regular basis, particularly what I-70 looks like. We support the recommendations with 3 exceptions. think the previous two speakers mentioned this. So the first one is the one per parcel. I think the explanation was pretty clear there. I'm not aware of any, right, there's no regulation in the state of Kansas or in Johnson County that one per parcel, the separation feet of 600 feet, the separation from the exits. There's a built-in, the separation from residential being either 500 or 1,000. I mean, those are limitations unto themselves. That additional limitation doesn't seem fair, and that's been already addressed. The height, that issue's been addressed tonight. 50 feet. A lot of signs as you see in the Kansas City area on the Missouri side, a lot of those are 75 or 100, but most signs are around 50 feet. That's not an unreasonable. If you got to jump 30 feet, that's a pretty high jump. But when you talk about a billboard, a 30-foot high billboard is not a very tall billboard. A 50-foot billboard fits very much into the adjacent, vision, if you will, as you go down a road. That doesn't seem unreasonable. And the last is the setback. And originally, what we looked at in August was a 15-foot setback, and Dave may address why it was changed to 50, but a 50-foot setback is a long way into a property in terms of the billboards being able to be seen. The state doesn't require any setback, that being they can't be over the right-of-way. But a 15-feet setback is a reasonable setback, allows to get around the sign for various reasons, emergency personnel, if that would ever happen. So, again, we appreciate all the effort that the staff has made. A lot of work went into this. We think the regulations are good. Without these three changes, it's unlikely any billboards will be built. 30-foot high billboard, going to be really hard to see. A billboard 50 feet back in a property is economically, first of all, landowners aren't going to want it. And second of all, they're not going to be able to be seen. So I can answer any questions if needed. Or
Thanks, sir.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Seeing no one come to the podium, I'd accept a motion to close the public hearing.
So moved.
We have a motion by Commissioner McNear. Do I have a second?
Second.
Second by Commissioner Hanson. Any discussion on the motion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any against? Any abstentions? Motion passes 6-0 to close the public. All right, this is time for commissioner comments. I'll start all the way to my right. We'll do one by one on this.
Thank you for everyone who came and spoke tonight during the public hearing. I think what they said brings considerable information to what we need to discuss. I'm more concerned with the growing community of Gardner, and I don't want to do anything that hampers that. But for myself, I would like to see what the difference is between 30 feet versus 50 feet. What impact that has. I don't know if
So I think there's a couple things here, and when we think about this 30 and 50 feet, and I was made aware that this item was going to come up tonight by somebody this afternoon, and as we talked about it, I'm just going to give you a reference point at this point, but I think later on in the discussion I may talk a little bit more about this, but just as a reference point so that you have an idea, the Hampton Inn, when you think about it, it is 62 feet high, okay, from ground elevation to the top of it. So when we're talking 50 feet, we're talking about roughly a little less than a story shorter than the Hampton Inn. So when you think about that, we're right in that range roughly.
That's not right, it's about 12-foot difference. Story on the Hampton Inn, and 12 is about right for a story.
So it's at 62 feet. So visually it's a reference, because that has been a hard part of this, trying to get kind of that visual reference point. So hopefully that helps a little bit with that. I think the height issue to me is one that can fluctuate from place to place and depending on context, okay? Again, I think our greatest sensitivity is always going to be when we're near residential properties.
Right.
It doesn't matter. And even to the case of, as we think about growing on the east side of I-35, that idea that I've got residential that is abutting directly on I-35 and something that may or may not change there in the future, the separation distance, the 500, and this is where, as Fred was mentioning, Mr. Winger was mentioning, all these things work in combination, right? So hopefully the separation distance limits this and knocks that out of the situation. But I think we have adjustments for topography where maybe 50 feet works better. Context, down at the south end when you're more in an industrial, you got the warehouses across the way, maybe I'm not as concerned about that. So I think we may have some flexibility with height, but I think that may take a little more looking at that as we move forward. And I'll make a suggestion later, but I think you're on the right line of thought that we might be able to look at this a little bit more.
Okay. All right. Yeah, I think that's all I had. The height issue and just having a frame of reference for that. And like I said, when you made the presentation about, the residential areas and homeowners that bought their property or future homeowners who want an unobstructed view, or when we're having walkways and trails, because the Gardner trail system is such, I think, a defining part of our community, to not have people walking by billboard posts. That's just a big concern on my end. I think that's just something that I will have to really think on. That's my 2 cents.
Thank you. The 2 questions that I had was, the first one had to do with the height, so I think we kind of hashed that one out. The second one, when I kind of read through the requested changes to the proposed regulations for the number of principal use signs per parcel, it seems to me to make sense to establish a distance between signs rather than just one sign per parcel. So I see that we've kicked around 600 feet and 1,000 feet. I mean, where are we?
Yeah.
Where are we headed there?
From a staff standpoint, I think we have the separation distances the way they're shown, I think can alleviate this, and we do not necessarily have to include the maximum of 1 per parcel. I think the people who spoke during the public hearing are correct. I think we have enough separation distances and buffers and things like that we would be able to strike that out if we wanted to.
That's all I got.
Yes, the gentleman that was talking, that owns the Billboard company, had a question for you. When you mentioned, it sounded like a pretty good idea to maybe raise these to 50 feet. My question is, 30 versus 50 feet in height, and 50 feet versus something less than, I think you mentioned 15 in setbacks. If it's at 30 feet of height and 50 feet of setback, when people are driving down the road, would those be hard enough to see that it could potentially cause safety concerns versus being able to be taller, bigger, and closer to the road?
So there's been a lot of studies done on traffic safety on a wide variety of issues, and there's no data out there that says if you put one back further, it causes more safety concerns. It's been pretty well established that the height, there is some data that says if a sign would be 80 feet and above, there might be some concerns about the trajectory, the height, but on the setback, there's really no data on that. And there's quite a bit of data on traffic safety. And in general, billboards are pretty safe because the content is so small relative to a text message or other things that might distract a driver.
I guess the question I had.
Sorry, maybe I didn't answer right.
This. If you're driving down the road, I'm just sitting there thinking, like when I'm driving, if a sign was harder to see because it was further back or not as high, or, let's say it was a 30-foot limitation, you had to be 50 feet off the lot, off the right of way, and you're going 65, 70, somewhere between 65 and 70 miles an hour. And you said, "What was that sign?" And you go, your eyes are off the road for just a second. I was wondering if the 50 feet height and closer in just makes them easier to read.
It does make them easier to read, but I don't believe there's any data that would say that one that's at 50 versus 30 is safer, and I wouldn't say that bring it in. It is easier to read. There's no question it's easier to read. But in terms of being safer, I don't know that there's any data that would say that, with the exception of signs that are like 80 feet and above. Those draw your eye up, but there's no data that says that.
Thank you, sir.
Okay.
Do we make any differentiation in the proposed amendments for setbacks for digital signs versus, what was the other, non-digital ones?
So setbacks from the right-of-way?
Yes.
No, there was no differentiation made. I think to clarify this, Mr. Wingert was right. Originally, we had 15 feet of setback back in August. The reason it was moved to 50 was to be consistent with the county regulations and just to have that consistency. I've worked with jurisdictions that have had 0 setback on these signs. Obviously, as was mentioned before, the state does not want the sign to overhang into the right-of-way. They've never required a setback off of the right-of-way. So would staff or I be comfortable with 15 feet versus 50? I think that setback is something that we could give on also. It doesn't have to be what the county says. The state does not require any setback whatsoever. So at that point, we're free to kind of set it the way we want to. The worst case scenario that I've seen with these situations is when a billboard is right along the right-of-way line and the state comes in and decides to expand a lane or do something different and expand its right-of-way, because at that point in time, they're gonna have to take the sign, they're gonna pay the cost for that sign and the replacement of that sign and so on and so forth as a road project element. So I like a little bit of setback because of that potential, but 50 feet may be more than we need to worry about, quite frankly. So I'm not opposed to the 15 feet as has been proposed here. That 15 feet at least gives us some flexibility that if there was a lane widening and it didn't require, an interchange or an extra ramp or anything like that, it should be able to accommodate that pretty readily, because that right of way is pretty wide through there already.
I just had one more comment. I guess last month when you told us to kind of pay attention, look for stuff around the road, I do a lot of travel for work up I-29, and I-29 Northwest Missouri is like the highest concentration of billboards anywhere in the Midwest, really. Well, maybe not the whole Midwest, but especially Missouri. And in regards to the comment about the number on the number, how many signs on number of parcels, there's a spot you come over and you can tell the signs are fairly new. There's some kind of regulations in place. So it looks like there's a few hundred feet in between them, but there's boom, 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 3 of them right in a row. And like, come over, it's nice farmland besides that. So like, whether there's 1 sign there, 3 signs there, or no signs there, like, I tend to enjoy my view driving, so, versus seeing billboards. But that's just my opinion. No further comments besides that.
Okay, thanks, sir. Commissioner Cooper?
I have a question for the gentleman who has the sign company. And there's a gentleman who's raising his hand, did you see him? How many, you said that there were only a few locations where there was actually enough frontage and space and development that you could put signs. Can you tell us with a little more specificity approximately how many there's space for there?
So there would be space for one on the Jacobs property, which would be north of 175th. There would be on the, I think it's the Hampton or the Walmart property, there would be. Walmart's not gonna go for a billboard on their property. There would be on so around 175th, there's really one spot. And then because of where it widens, and then this is the current zoning, by the way. Okay, where it's industrial. And then there's a spot on the Aspen Creek property that would be above where it says Purple Heart Trail. It's the blue, I don't know, is there a way to use a marker on this thing at all? Or okay. So I don't know how to best, it's the triangle property, you see where the border on this crosses over 35 north of the Gardner Road exit? That property, okay, there we go, right there. Who has the marker? Okay. So it's this one right here, Bob. It's this guy right here.
The Olathe Medical Center?
It's north of that one. It's a little bit lower, Bob.
Oh, there you go.
Go down, right, that one right there. So on that corner there, the Olathe Medical is too close. The 500 feet is too close. And then I think that if you go down to the Radke property there, Bob, that's on the other side. Yeah, you're close. The Radke right there. I think there was one that could go right there. It's kind of close to whether a little bit up there. Not that one. The one across up above there, right there. That one. That's the Radke property right there. So I think right now the way that they're zoned, and Dave, you can chime in. I think it's just those three.
Yeah, it's pretty limiting overall with the separation distances and things like that. And as Mr. Winger was mentioning, this is with the current zoning, so that's
Yep.
the crucial part of it, so that everybody knows, because some of that area, even when you go from Gardner Road to the south, or what would be the southwest, but you're on the north side of the interstate, some of that is zoned agricultural, so it would require rezoning and things like that. So there may be an opportunity there. But again, when I look at that area, including that southern area, you've got that warehouse element down there. You've got a different character and a different context down there, and the impact of a billboard may not be the same visually as it might be further north as we get into where the residential areas are. So from that perspective, I think all of this would have to be, double checked out in field measurements and all kinds of things like that. But I think it's an accurate depiction to say that you're probably 3-4 parcels, maybe 5 parcels that are sitting out there, understanding that still a large percentage of this on the east side is still under county jurisdiction. We're not going to be changing those rules, and those rules, as it was pointed out to me, are pretty stringent compared to what we're doing right now.
I just wanted to point out the state of Kansas they have those blue informational signs that also inform drivers of what's coming up along the highway for restaurants, gas, lodging, and other important pieces as well.
I will say, and if you drove I-35 through here at all between last month and here, there are not very many billboards at all right now existing, and in some cases I actually missed a couple because I really wasn't looking for them where they were at down there in that south part of the property. But those 2 signs are also out in the county right now, so they're going to be regulated by the county at that point in time. I don't. I'll let you make your comments.
And I looked through all this, and it's stuff that the city found out about some of these things here very recently. We're writing in something that's basically new into our code. We got kind of a lot thrown on us in a short amount of time, so I personally would like a little bit more time. But having said that, I tend to be a property rights type person, so I feel it is a little restrictive on the one sign per parcel. I feel that the distance and the zoning would be more appropriate. The billboard signs that we mentioned, how tall are they?
I don't know for sure. Mr. Winger, do you know, because 2 of them I believe are yours, so you may know the height dimension. I don't know those right on.
They are 30 feet tall.
30 feet tall.
So,
Yeah.
what is unique about them is they are on a super flat parcel that's very, very flat, and there's no trees, but they are 30 feet tall.
Okay, thank you.
And that raises a very interesting point from that standpoint, because you do have variations with the different parcels. You have elevation differences, you have vegetation differences, you do have things that are going on the various parcels. I think I'm going to let you finish your comments first, and then I may talk a little bit about maybe potentially what I'm hearing and where we may want to go with
I don't have a, I think 15 feet or so is fine, and I don't have, I'm pretty much what they're asking for, I generally don't have any issue with. So that's kind of where I stand, but it's a lot in a short amount of time, and I personally would prefer a little bit of time. Now I'm gonna do something here. Public comment's done, but sir, I can't allow you to come up and say what you're raising your hand
Say
for.
can or can't?
I will.
Oh, thank
So
you.
you just come up, say your
Well,
name.
I apologize, I don't hear well.
Yeah, that's fine.
And I didn't hear everything that Dave said either, or some of the discussion, but I just wanted to comment on my particular property. About roughly 30 feet from the highway, I've got red cedars, just solid red cedars, and they're 30, 35 feet high. If we have that 50-foot setback, I've got to cut all those down, which it'll ruin some things, I think. So if we could be above that tree height, then, back in a little bit would make it a lot better opportunity. Thank you, appreciate it.
Thank you, sir. All right, Dave.
So what I'm hearing, and there's a couple things that, just to sum this up, I think I'm not hearing any heartburn if we were to strike out the one sign per parcel maximum. I didn't hear anybody just say, hey, we have to have that. I'm comfortable striking that out as staff, given our separation distances and some of the things that were talked about here. So I think that's something that we could remove fairly easily. I'm also comfortable with the setback, pushing it so that the signs are up closer. The 15 feet, I think, is reasonable. It does allow some flexibility if the right-of-way needs to expand for a utility purpose or something crazy like that. It's crazy. That's not that crazy, is it, to think about utility expansion there? But anyway, sorry about that. So the 15 feet, I can see us going to that. If you feel you want to go lesser than that, that's fine too. The height issue, as I'm thinking about it, and again, this was brought to me, relatively late in the game. The height issue, I do think we have a variety of context factors that we should take into consideration. So one of the things that we might want to consider doing is saying something to the effect that anything over 30 feet might require a conditional use permit. Now, when I say that, we take a step back, it's another process, but what it would allow us to do is look at each individual situation. So if there's an elevation issue or a vegetation issue or even a context issue because of development that's going on around it that we have a sensitivity to, it would allow the opportunity for the sign to be taller. Now, it could never be higher than the 50 feet because that's a state requirement. So we're stuck at that topped out level. But at least with a conditional use permit, if somebody came in with a proposal and said, yeah, we really need 45 feet here, and they give us the justification, they could come through the conditional use permit process. You would have that opportunity to review that, look at that context, and decide that more on a case-by-case basis. It is an added step to the procedural process of getting the permit, but I will say from a staff and a city standpoint, I'm always going to err on the conservative side of sensitivity, not knowing what the future development really looks like, even though I'm supposed to be a planner and know all, right? I should have that crystal ball and be able to see it all. Not knowing really what that east side may still evolve into as a combination of uses. I would feel comfortable with something that at least, even though it's a procedural step, it gives that potential flexibility. It gives us the opportunity to look at a case-by-case or a lot property-by-property basis. And I think in the case that we have with Mr. Baker, looking at that where you have a significant amount of frontage, I do know the topography does change on that property back and forth. There's some low spots as well, and it may be something where that little extra height is well justified and fits into the context, and if you're comfortable doing that. So that could be some language we could change and adjust to do that. I'd need a little more time to work on that part of it, but that is something that I could do.
I was going to suggest table it so you can work on that. Commissioner McNear's going to.
Dave, I was on the same thought. Is there anything about what we're talking about tonight that's really direly urgent?
I don't believe so. I don't think we're trying to do this under the gun of, you know, 1 week or anything like that.
So is it, some of the comments and recommendations and requests that have been made tonight, is that something that could be fairly easily incorporated into a new consideration
Yeah.
for us by staff and make the whole process a little more streamlined?
2 of the 3 things are pretty easy. I mean, it's a pretty easy one. If those were the only 2 things, we could probably just make the modifications you could recommend with those modifications. The third one, if you're comfortable with me exploring that conditional use permit kind of element of this, that's gonna take me a little while to get the language right.
So if we continued this, would that give you the time to?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Can I
Yeah,
ask
go ahead.
another question? I was trying to, when I was reading through this, I had the LDC pulled up, and so I was reading a lot. And so, correct me if I'm wrong, did I read in there somewhere about where the poles of the signs, landscaping, or was that just?
So the way our code is written right now, okay, for monument signs and pole signs. So this would be a principal use sign, but it would either be a monument or a pole sign. There is some requirements there for landscaping for pole signs and monument signs. I believe, off the top of my head, I can't remember if the area of landscaping is the equivalent of the display area of the sign. I'd have to check that. I don't have that right off the top of my head. But you're correct, there is a piece under those monument standards and under those pole standards that requires some landscaping to that. Now, having said that, that doesn't mean it has to be shade trees, it doesn't.
Right.
It may be native vegetation that is done to restore the area around it to make it look nice and things like that. I can take a look at that closer to see what that is. I can do that during this, you know, time if we table it tonight. I can look at that language too.
Okay, because I was just wondering, like, since I said my primary concern is residential property, property value, things like that, if we could make that, if we could include that if someone's going to put up these signs.
Right now, it would be included because I do believe we made a citation, check here, I think we made a citation in there that they would have to meet the standards for pole or monument signs
Okay.
as part of those modifications.
Okay.
So I think that's already there.
Okay,
And we wouldn't necessarily, thank you, there you go. Yeah, so it says the pole sign shall be located within a landscape area that is at least equal to the area of the sign, and which is in addition to any landscape area required by the site design standards of the code. So a lot of that is, the hard part in this whole thing is if a sign comes on the property before development occurs, right, it's gonna be in a different context than if it's coming in with a development plan. A lot of this is written towards, okay, if I have a development plan, what we don't want is parking lot around the base of a pole sign for a sign of this type. So that's the intent of tying these together so that we retain that open space and landscaping around there. It may be a requirement, and I can look at this, like I said, between now and your next meeting, I can look at this closer to just get a feel for what that requirement would be under a typical scenario.
okay.
I'm getting the sense here that probably waiting just a little bit to give staff time to do that. So I'm gonna propose a motion, that we,
It's gonna be the table.
that's gonna be to, yes, sir. Yep, okay. To continue the application or
I
table.
was just gonna make sure I think our city attorney representative here will verify this too. Just make sure that when you make your table motion, it's to a specific date. Right.
What's the date of the next meeting?
October.
You were supposed to ask so
Yeah.
fast.
Darn. Should have had that memorized.
No,
No, wait, look at the wrong one. October 25th.
October 25th.
Okay.
Next regularly scheduled meeting.
Next, Mr. Chairman, I'd like to propose a motion to table this item until our next regularly scheduled meeting, October 25th, to allow staff and the public to have time to make comments.
Okay, do I have a second on the motion?
Second.
Okay, I have a motion by Commissioner McNear to table this item until our next meeting, October 25th, 2021, and a second by Commissioner Ham. Do we have any further discussion on the motion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any against? Any abstentions? This item is tabled, vote 6-0. And we have no more regular agenda items. So,
Just discussion items and updates.
yes.
Do you want to go first?
You can go first and do a discussion item, or I can go.
I want to make sure we're thinking about calendars. As you know, we moved to that fourth Monday, so October 25th, November 22nd, okay, which is the Monday before Thanksgiving. So just be aware of that one. And then December 27th, we will be working diligently. The December meeting, sometimes you all think about moving that a little bit earlier or whatever. We're going to be trying to watch our applications. If we're not seeing a lot of application activity, we may suggest that we cancel the December meeting, because that's Saturday is actually Christmas Day, so that would be the Monday after Christmas Day. So that may not work for people's calendars. So we're going to watch this as it's coming out with applications and things like that. As far as November 22nd, we will do the same thing and just kind of watch what's going on with those things. But just have those marked that may be a problematic day for me, and then I'll have to leave you in Bob's hands. At that point, I don't know.
I agree.
So I just wanted to make you aware, watch calendars, let me know if any of those dates are becoming problematic for you. The earlier we know, the better off we are, because if we need to make an adjustment, we can do it the month ahead of time and potentially consider an alternate date so that we can publish that alternate date. So, okay, that's all I have at this point.
All right, and then for me, this will be my last meeting. After 23 years, I'm moving out to Gardner. All three of my kids come completely to the Gardner School District. We're moving to a different area, so after I really enjoyed the Planning Commission, I actually hate to give it up, but I'm not allowed to do it any longer, so just inform everybody this is it.
Can't they make an exception?
I won't be in the state, so.
Oh, you won't? Wow.
My
So-
understanding is that things may get delayed enough that you can be here for October.
Yeah.
That's my understanding at my
There
point.
is the potential technically that I could make the next meeting, but I will let you know for sure. But if everything goes correctly, I probably won't, but if there's any delay.
And the only reason I mention that is that we have to coordinate the process through the city clerk, and that for appointments to fill the vacated position. So that takes a little bit of time too. So what we're glad about is that Scott has brought this up early enough that we can start thinking about it administratively. Which we're sad about is we're losing them. So just be aware of that. We will be working behind the scenes. The city clerk is really in charge of the selection process, or the solicitation process, I should say, for getting applications, and then the process that goes through the mayor and council for the selection of whoever fills that.
If I can make the next one, I will, so we can finish this sign thing.
What we're likely to do also in the meantime is the vice chair would fill the roles of the chair position for the next couple of months. Your elections are in January, so there's no reason to run a vote and then re-vote in 2 months. So what we're thinking right now is the vice chair would be responsible for running the meetings at this point in time, moving forward until we have those elections in January, first part of next year. Then you can look at all the positions and decide how you want to do that. But just keep that in your back of your minds for now.
All right.
Well, before we adjourn,
Oh,
Now what?
I just wanted to publicly thank Chair Bowden for all of your experience and your leadership. Really appreciate during the time that I've been here. Learned a lot from watching you, and appreciate all the time you've given to the city as well. So thank you.
Thanks, sir.
I concur.
Yeah.
thanks again, Scott. It's been, you've been very supportive of all of us when we were first starting out and learning, and have run an exceptionally well-managed and controlled and led meetings. Thank you, sir. Thank you.
And I want to echo that from the staff standpoint. I know Bob's had more experience with you than I have, so I'm going to let Bob speak. very quickly. I've only had the luxury of working with you for about 10 meetings out of 12, so it's been a pleasure working with you. I appreciate the way you manage meetings and the way you go about your business, so I want to thank you for that. I'm going to let Bob speak because I know he has more of a history with you guys. So.
And I'll keep it nice too. No, it's been a great pleasure having you serve as the chair. You've been, I think, the chair ever since I've been here for, what, 2.5 years. So we appreciate your leadership, your insight into planning, and the willingness to learn that big book whenever we present it. It's difficult.
Almost
projects.
5 years, I've never missed a meeting.
Thank you.
All right, with nothing further, thank you all. I accept a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
All right, I have a motion to adjourn by Commissioner McNear and a second by Commissioner Hanson. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.